The Peloponnesian War was no ordinary conflict. It was a brutal, decades-long struggle that pitted the greatest powers of ancient Greece against each other: Athens, the shining beacon of democracy and naval supremacy, against Sparta, the militaristic juggernaut built for war. This was not just a battle for land or resources. It was a fight for dominance, a war that would leave Greece fractured, vulnerable, and ultimately, in ruins. For years, the Greeks had stood united against the Persian Empire, pushing back the invaders in legendary battles at Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis. But with the Persian threat fading, old rivalries resurfaced. Athens, fresh from its victories, was on the rise. Its powerful navy controlled trade routes, its wealth grew, and its cultural influence spread across the Aegean. At the heart of this power was the Delian League, a coalition of city-states led by Athens, originally formed to defend against Persia. But over time, this alliance became something else, an empire in all but name, with Athens forcing its so-called allies to pay tribute, funding its grand projects, including the magnificent Parthenon. Sparta, the warrior society, watched with growing alarm. They had long been the dominant power in Greece, their strength rooted in their ruthless military discipline and rigid social structure. But Athens' expansion threatened the balance of power. Sparta's allies, especially Corinth, saw Athens' control as tyranny and pushed for war. Tensions exploded when Athens placed trade restrictions on the Megarians, crippling their economy. Sparta issued an ultimatum: Athens must back down or there would be war. The Athenians refused. The conflict that followed would engulf the entire Greek world. The war began with a clash of strategies. Pericles, Athens' brilliant leader, knew that his city could never match Sparta's army on land. Instead, he ordered the Athenian population to retreat behind the city's massive walls, relying on their superior navy to supply them and wear down the Spartans with naval raids. The strategy was sound until disaster struck. A deadly plague swept through the crowded city, killing thousands, including Pericles himself. With Athens weakened, Sparta and its allies pressed the attack, ravaging the countryside and forcing Athens into an endless war of attrition. Despite these setbacks, Athens struck back. At sea, they remained undefeated, launching devastating raids on the Peloponnesian coast. The city-state of Plataea, an ally of Athens, was besieged by the Spartans and Thebans. Starving and outnumbered, the defenders fought to the death, but Sparta showed no mercy. The men were executed, the women and children enslaved, a grim preview of what was to come. As the war dragged on, both sides turned to ruthless tactics. Athens crushed rebellions with brutal force, as seen in Mytilene, where they initially voted to execute every man in the city, though they later relented. Meanwhile, Sparta used guerrilla tactics to harass Athenian supply lines, striking hard in rough terrain where hoplites struggled. But the true turning point came when Athens, in an ambitious gamble, launched a massive invasion of Sicily, aiming to cut off Sparta's resources and gain a decisive victory. The Sicilian expedition was a disaster. The Athenian army, led by the overconfident generals Nicias and Alcibiades, was outmaneuvered and outclassed. Their fleet was trapped, their soldiers slaughtered or sold into slavery. It was a catastrophic loss from which Athens would never recover. Seeing weakness, Sparta made its move. With Persian gold funding a new fleet, the Spartans built a navy to rival Athens and launched an all-out assault. The final blow came at Aegospotami, where the Spartan admiral Lysander caught the Athenian fleet off guard. In a single, crushing strike, the pride of Athens was destroyed. With their navy gone, the city was defenseless. The Spartans laid siege to Athens, cutting off food and supplies. Starvation and desperation followed. Finally, the once mighty city surrendered. The war was over. Sparta forced Athens to tear down its walls, dismantle its empire, and submit to its rule. But victory was not sweet for Sparta. Greece was in ruins, its cities weakened, its people exhausted. Decades of war had shattered the unity of the Greek world. And in the shadows, a new power watched and waited: Macedon. It would not be long before a young king named Alexander would rise to claim what was left of Greece and reshape the world forever. Sparta had won the war, but it was a hollow victory. The once mighty Greek world was now a shattered mosaic of weakened city-states, each struggling to recover from decades of bloodshed. Athens, though defeated, remained a center of culture and philosophy, but its political power was gone. Sparta, victorious but overstretched, faced new threats. Maintaining dominance over Greece proved far more difficult than defeating Athens. The very allies who had supported Sparta now turned against it. Corinth and Thebes resented Spartan rule, and soon the so-called liberators of Greece became oppressors. Meanwhile, across the northern border of Greece, a new power was rising. Macedon had long been considered a backwater, a land of barbaric kings and rugged warriors. But under King Philip II, Macedon was transforming into a military powerhouse. Philip, a cunning strategist and master of diplomacy, saw the Greek city-states as ripe for the taking. He exploited their divisions, bribing some, defeating others, and slowly tightening his grip on the fractured land. When Sparta and Thebes fought in the Corinthian War, Philip watched and waited, knowing that their mutual destruction would only make his conquest easier. The final blow to Greek independence came at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC. Philip's army, now the most formidable force in the region, crushed the combined forces of Athens and Thebes. Among his soldiers was his son, a young prince who had already shown signs of genius, Alexander. With this victory, Greek autonomy was over. The city-states were no longer masters of their own fate. They were now part of Macedon's growing empire. Sparta, once the terror of Greece, refused to bow. But Philip had no need to destroy them. He simply ignored them. Sparta, for all its military prowess, was no longer relevant. As Macedon rose, Sparta faded into history, a relic of a bygone era. The war that was meant to determine Greek supremacy had, in the end, destroyed Greece itself. And then came Alexander. When Philip was assassinated, his son took the throne, and within a few short years, he unleashed a campaign that would reshape the ancient world. With the Greek city-states firmly under his control, he marched east, launching his legendary conquest of the Persian Empire. Had Athens and Sparta not torn each other apart, had Greece remained strong and united, perhaps history would have been different. But the Peloponnesian War had ensured that when the Macedonians came, Greece would be powerless to resist. The war that began as a struggle for Greek dominance ended with the Greeks as mere footnotes in a larger empire. Their golden age was over, their independence was lost, and their once great civilization would never be the same again.